All right, good afternoon. You are all welcome to um, the April meetup for Python user group O. And the theme for this month's meetup is open source with Python. So a lot of people have asked about what open source actually is and how they can get started. They've been hearing about open source here and there, and they don't have the idea about exactly how to be part of the open source community. And we know Python is an open source programming language, and then we have the Python community all across the world, and then we do meetups, events here and there. So we decided to, okay, fine, put together some resources and some personnel from the industry to help us digest what open source is, and hence our meetup for this month. So we have on the call um, Don Wages, Afi, Abigail, and Duncan Ephraim, who will be sharing it with us from the open source community, how they get started, how you and I as audience can also get started, and then learn a thing or two from them. So, without wasting much time, let's kickstart. So, Don.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, for being here. I'm so excited. And this is also a talk that I'll be giving in a number of places. So if you see this content again, it'll be because that I started talking about it with you all. So if you have feedback on things that you wish you knew or wish I could cover in more detail, please let me know. I also have my email address in this presentation as well, so feel free to email. And also, I have a particular love for all of the Pythonistas in the African diaspora that I've been meeting these days. And so I really consider us friends now. So just because, so please find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter, find me on Mastodon. I really enjoy the conversations that we have and the innovation that's coming out of the African continent. And so I'm just excited to expand my network to talk to you all. So, today I'm going to be talking about until you can invent, you imitate. Um, this will be pretty general context. It will be talking about Python as well, but it's really giving a basis for understanding where you can start and then where you can go. And I talk about both inventing and imitation. And I want to also give enough time for Afi to get into her presentation too. So I won't go too in depth in all of these. You can find the slides at this bit.ly link at the bottom of this slide, and it'll be at the bottom of all of the slides. All right. So who am I and why should you listen to me? Well, my name's Dawn Wages. You don't actually have to listen to me at all. Um, but I am a Python community manager. I'm the Python community manager at Microsoft. I'm the only one doing this job. We should probably have more. But for people who know a little bit about Microsoft's history, they've not always played nice with open source. Um, a few decades ago, as open source is really ramping up more, Microsoft, the giant, really thought they could do it on their own without trying to navigate to open source and try to build elite products that are proprietary, which means they are closed source. They're run by, Microsoft manages to get the best minds in the world to work on their software. But it but the power of open source and a whole bunch of actors in at their computers hacking on stuff that they think is interesting and fun and contributing and building off of other work has won. And I think there's a really good success story, um, given that Microsoft has an open source programming office. That's an office that is dedicated to the workings of Microsoft in its open source community, that there's a Python community manager at Microsoft, because Microsoft doesn't do anything particular with the language. We don't own the language, we contribute to it. But there's no real reason why we necessarily need a community manager other than the fact that we want to build relationships with the open source community and leverage a lot of the work that's being done and make sure that they're represented in our products and that we're supporting those Python users as well. So it's a huge success for open source that my job even exists. I'm also the chair of the Python Software Foundation, so that's been a job that I've been doing for the past year. I've been here since, and also let me open up the chat just in case I miss anything too. Oh, there will be an answering open answer question if you'd like to chat about things. Um, Yes, so my I've been doing this for about a year. I've been on the board for 2 years. I'm still not sure if I'm going to be chair next year. I don't even know if I'm going to run, but it's been a really enlightening experience. And one of my chief goals on the Python Software Foundation board is to help bring processes to the Python organization. So we take individual requests that happen. We handle those particular requests, for example, grants, but then we also have to look at each of those requests and see how they're doing and if there's ways that we can improve processes so more requests like that can continue to come in. And then my job as the chair of the board is to make sure that there is consensus among the board. That's not always what happens. People feel very passionately among the 12 to 13 people who are on the board at any given time, and we disagree a lot. But in Python, in particular, a culture that we've developed is one that we really like to come to a consensus and to discuss things and come to an agreement because we all have very similar values on supporting a very diverse community, keeping people safe, and we just differ in approaches. So we try to discuss those things, and it's not an easy job, but I really, really have learned a lot trying to push that mission forward. I'm also the organizer, one of the lead organizers for Django Not Space. How many Django people, fans, users do we have hanging out with us? You can like jump into the chat. I'm looking at the chat as well. If you're interested in Django or contributing to Django, which is a Python web framework, uh, feel free to reach out to me. Django Space is a peer contributor program. We set you up with mentors and you get a group of people to work with at the same time. And it is an 8-week program. And then you are encouraged to provide Python code to the Django web framework, and you'll be an open source contributor as well at the end of the process. And that's really, really exciting and it can really push you forward through your career. And then I have a couple pictures of myself on the side. So these are things that you are feel free to talk to me about. So in open source, we are in a field of makers. There's a large group of people who consider ourselves artists or innovators. We also call ourselves engineers, although we don't have engineering certifications exactly. It's software is this weird new field where we're building things, but they're not really tangible necessarily. And what does that mean? Well, I love to still consider ourselves makers. We are building things. And I relate us to carpenters. We are carpenters who create out in the open, we create for free, and we change the world. I gave the example of Microsoft, but we are changing the world. Open source is involved in almost every aspect. I think very safely every aspect to some degree of technology. But there are disclaimers incoming because it's not always open. The freeness is a little bit more obscured, and the way that we change the world is always in unexpected ways. So how do we create in the open? Many people are using GitHub. There are also other code repositories that you can use. There's GitLab, Bitbucket. I've used all of these above. There are other ways as well. You could share a gist file, for example, just over the internet. But these are hosting services. the largest of which is GitHub. But you can go and explore code on GitHub right now that people are using in production to power ships on Mars, and they're doing it in Python. Also in the open and not to be underrepresented or glossed over is blogging, speaking, going to sprints, and going to organizational retreats. Now, sprints and retreats and speaking sometimes come with having more experience in open source. Many people invite you, but don't wait until you're invited all the time. Try to invite yourself. It is very scary. It is very likely in the first times you do so, you're going to be met with rejection, and or sometimes being ignored. Um, and that's not an indicator of who you are or what you're reaching out for, but it's more an indicator of you're just dealing with people in general with busy schedules that may not be expecting your response. Not a lot of people are brave enough to say, hey, I'd like to join in on the fun, even though I don't have a lot of context on what's going on. It looks like there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And so not a lot of people are brave enough to do that, but I've gotten a lot of my opportunities by really just walking up and saying that this is interesting to me. I really like what you're doing and I'm learning more about it. Can I join? And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to be at the WASM Summit, the WebAssembly Summit at PyCon. I'm not a WebAssembly expert. It's something that I'm getting into. I want to contribute more to CPython, the actual Python programming language. And so I raised my hands. I talked to a few people. I found some new free people, and I'm going to be going to the summit. I'm going to be learning a lot more. So you're seeing my journey in real time, and it's a little bit scary to talk about out loud. And I am really an expert in some areas, and this is one where I'm not. And so I'm starting this whole new journey and doing it out in the open. For retreats, and many times those are usually invite only when you're going to be like um, sprinting on a roadmap or something like that for a project that's usually well used. But the caveat on people who are creating in the open is many times it's easy to see the latest commits or the latest blog posts and not see all of the work that has gone behind the scenes that have been happening for years, or for the huge network that people are tapping into to be able to create that well informed commit that solves a problem, or to create that blog post that's really, really well written and goes in depth and answers questions, because people are reaching out to the network as well. So also you see the magic of people creating out in the open and the being intimidated to maybe create just alongside them, just like I mentioned. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. So making sure that you're tempering your expectations on how polished it should be, comparing yourself to people who've been doing it for 20 years um, versus you just starting today, is a good way to be able to give yourself the confidence that you have somewhere to go and that you'll get there. Another option or another component of being a field of makers in open source is we're a group of people who create for free. So there's a couple of caveats on this one. One, for people who may not know, it's considered free open source software. People use the term it is free like a puppy, not free like cake. So free, it is something that you have to take care of. Um, it is a gift that you can get from friends and strangers on the internet, but it needs to be updated and maintained, and recognizing where that code comes from and what's in it is really, really important for security issues, for trying to make money off of it. You should understand how copyright and open source licenses work, because if you're using a piece of code and you want to build an entrepreneurial endeavor with it, or you want to build something that is using someone else's code, but then also leads to someone else doing entrepreneurship with it, you should understand the difference between copyleft and copyright licenses. So most open source licenses use copyleft licenses, which means all of its derivative works will also have the applying license. There's also a discipline of open source licenses that I'm working in called ethical source licenses. I've created the first anti racist license a few years ago, and it uses the same mechanism that open source licenses use, where someone violates any of the stipulations in the open source license, and in this case, it'll be ethical stipulations. It is specifically saying in very clear terms, and we have about, I think, 60 stipulations on ways not to be racist in your code, and we use experiential evidence for it, for the things that we put in the license. Uh, and if they are violating that term with the code that they have, then we can start a legal process to stop what they're working on and saying, hey, you can't use our code because you are using it for racist means. For example, there are other ethical source licenses that follow a bunch of other stipulations, but I think it's really important to understand what free means and how there is a caveat around free because you still need to take care of it. But also, free as in someone's not receiving any money to give that code away. And if you want to be an open source contributor, are you expected to be able to make a living doing open source? And that's really where the caveat at the disclaimer at the bottom of the screen that points to is that there's still privilege and access that happens in open source just like it happens in every other component around the world. People who come from privileged backgrounds, who have large savings, who live in stable environments, stable countries with stable resources, they're able to do things for free because they don't have the overhead to have to think about and worry about and pay that tax, for example, of having to navigate some of these disadvantages that the world throws at us. I'm a black woman. I am a queer woman of color. I come from uh, middle class, so I also have a lot of privileges as well. But there's a level of fight and grit that I've had to have in the industry in order to be able to stick around and pay my bills and try to juggle things at the same time. I could give a whole talk on how to do that and how I've thought about doing that and how I figured out how to make money at the same time. The short answer is I try to contribute in open source in ways that are also benefiting me in ways that's going to benefit my pocket, my money. So I'll, for example, I worked in I oh I'm wearing the shirt. I contribute to Wagtail, which is a content management system, and I used to build, I still do, build websites for agencies and for end clients using Wagtail. Wagtail is a really great framework because I can build very quickly and then make money very quickly. And so that's why I picked that tool. And then I would contribute to open source in ways that were helpful to my peers in open source, but also would help me make money. I'd add features and things like that, and it would help me sell for my gigs. That's an example. But free, in a lot of different ways, has huge disclaimers on it, and free is a very common word thrown around in open source, but it's not always free. Also, we are in a field that's changing the world. Like I mentioned, we are everywhere. Open source is everywhere. But again, society and societal problems don't stop at software. So there's a lot of people who are changing the world but don't get the recognition. And if you're interested in changing the world and adding that contribution to the world, I know personally, and I've talked to my mentor about this, and a couple of my mentors about this, that the ego, I want the credit. I know that I want the credit. I want to talk on stage about that really cool thing that I added to that code base and how I got there. And I know that that's important to my journey. So I'm setting myself up as I'm giving my contribution to not let people forget about the important work that I want to do and that I'm doing. But it's not a given, and it's also not important to everyone. So it's if that's something that you also know, there's no shame in saying that you want the credit for the work that you're working on, more than just having a commit or having your name in the release notes, which is also very, very awesome. But there are resources and ways that we can lift you up and share your work. For example, in the Python Software Foundation, we can nominate you for a community service award or a distinguished service award. Those are also for like code contributions, or you can be a Python Software Foundation fellow for consistent and impeccable contribution to the Python language and the Python community. So I want that to be underscored as well. People change the world, but also software moves so fast. So when you contribute a line of code or a whole new system or a paradigm of programming, someone can come in days later and change it up, remove your code, do an entirely different pattern. And they are building off of what they saw you do and then improving on it. And you may not see your work represented anymore, but you're still changing the world. It's just this ephemeral, very short lived sometimes view on what software can be, and that's how it's built to be. So it is an ego boost, but it's also an ego humbler. And I think it's just in the nature of software, and I appreciate it and respect it. And I'm also very scared of how fast software moves. But that's also a caveat or a disclaimer on how changing the world works. So we're going to get into how do you imitate and how do you invent. This is a short list on how to imitate in Python, and this comes from some of the things that I'm working on and the things that I've done over the years and how I've gotten better at Python. I love to do it, and so you're here. This is a Python event. I love to start out with be having event driven learning. I love knowing people and knowing their face and figuring out who I can reach out to or find the work from those people. So, for example, this exact event was on python.org/events when I looked at it before this presentation. Go to that link. Have the ability, try to go in person. There are travel grants and things like that as well. But I gravitate towards finding speakers. Also, I recommend looking at the release notes, especially as I was starting. The release notes really weren't clicking on everything on what it meant. It was very in the weeds. They were very specific. But eventually, if you keep practicing, you'll find patterns in certain release notes, and you'll be able to follow certain features and feature additions as they evolve, and you'll become an expert before you even really realize it. But if you ever have questions on what's happening in the release notes, ask them. I also try to look at really well maintained packages. These are many times the most commonly used packages, but as you're just poking around, getting curious, looking at GitHub repositories, you're going to want to look for packages that are maintained by more than 3 people. I think that's a really good. 2 people is a little bit nerve wracking. 3 people is probably a good group, but more than 3 people, it really means that it's a much healthier project or package. You also want recent commits. Python moves pretty fast. There's a Python point release every year. We're going to be doing Python 3.13 in October. So you should see commit very frequently. That's like probably every year. But it really depends on the package. Sometimes Python is very good at being backwards compatible. So sometimes if it's a very small package, um, am I speaking too long?
Oh, no, 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 you can go ahead.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Um, so if there's a package that has not been maintained or updated in several years, I would be a little bit concerned and really check in with people and how often it's used. I also would recommend going to the Discuss on Python. It's discuss.python.org. It's a discussion forum. It's just a threaded forum. People are there all the time, and it is difficult and also a little bit nerve wracking to join in on some of those discussions. I know that I'm mostly just like a lurker at this point, and people do argue a bit about semantics or points, but I think in general, Python has a much healthier discussion um, dynamic in culture than a lot of other languages. And if you are concerned or you do want to weigh in on something but you're nervous, or if someone's being mean, like if someone just doesn't seem very nice to you, make friends in the community and then reach out and ask about it. I do that all the time. It's made me feel a lot safer, and I'm happy to be one of those friends that you have in the community. I've talked to people who've been doing this for 20 odd years, and I say, hey, this was a weird response. Can you tell me how I should be interpreting it? And I will sometimes get, oh no, that person is really just direct. Or I'll get, actually, I do understand your point. That is a very weird response. Let's figure out and strategize how to continue with your progress without talking to that person, or how to just like shake it off and work through it. But most people try to navigate with kindness in, with thought. All right. And how do you invent? So this is a little bit of a longer one. There's so many attributes for invention, and it's so broad. Um, First of all, invention really comes together when you're putting forth the effort, and then you are surprised with the opportunity. So I've been trying to get closer to my C Python contribution journey for several months, not too long, but it's really came to a head, and I've been contributing a lot more. Not much in code, but in structure, and it's getting there. Of when I found the opportunity to just chat with someone who has a little bit time on their schedule, and it's because their timeline changed, and we just happened to cross paths. So really getting yourself ready with the effort, and then the opportunity will come. You'll find people like me who may be willing and can connect you with others. um, Curiosity is one that I'm learning to grow more in, and it was a really profound statement from one of my mentors on, if you're looking at this on, and you don't have to always hunt for a problem to solve. For example, I don't know exactly how to improve the C Python was a WebAssembly experience. But if you're poking around, you're enjoying what you do, you lead with a sense of curiosity, you're going to stumble upon some of those limitations. Play with the tool that you have. And for example, I'll bring back the carpentry metaphor. If you're using a block of wood and you have your tools and you're just kind of chipping away and seeing how the wood works, and you're using pine over birch or different types of wood, right? And you're just kind of like chipping away and seeing and learning. And then you might come out with something that makes sense or looks good, or you're just kind of like figuring out will lead to finding problems and creating solutions that you had no idea about from the very beginning. So truly trusting in yourself, relaxing and enjoying the ride is a level of invention that has really been new to me. I've been motivated, especially because of my career, because of the need to sustain myself, the need to pay my bills. Um, so I haven't had a lot of opportunity to follow curiosity in my career, and I'm trying to give myself the opportunity to do that. And that's because, as I mentioned, that's because I have privilege, I have access, I have resources I didn't have before, but I have a lot more than other people who are coming new to this journey. So don't feel like you can't because you don't have those resources, but there's also you're navigating things at the same time as trying to gain those resources and the stability at the same time. Safety is one that I really wanted to hone in on in particular. So there's a PhD researcher named Lisa Cook who has been working in the space for economics and innovation for decades. And as she was working on her PhD, I believe a few decades ago, I think this was probably around 2013 or so. I got to look at the date, but she disagreed with her professor and her mentors on what it takes to make innovation. So this is all this is very much in the U.S. context. As they were doing a lot of this research, her professor was measuring innovation by the patent laws, or excuse me, by patents that were passed. And so there is a when you make more supportive laws to let people patent their inventions. And a patent is what you can file with a government in order to protect your works. It is similar to a copyright, for example, but people can't steal your works, which is a symbol of creating new things, right? So you have to submit an application to say that this does not exist before, and then they will affirm that, issue your patent, and then other people can't copy. So as people create more patents, there is this expectation that innovation is rising. And there was a really good point that Lisa Cook created or made, was that there needs to also be safe conditions for people to create. And she used the racism in North America and in the U.S., specifically the U.S., and charted large racial and racist events that happened in the global US, and saw the patents of, of African Americans in the US go up and down as these racist events happened in the United States. And it was done through, and for those who are familiar with statistics, there is a statistical analysis that's also done to make sure it is causational instead of correlational. But she had a statistic analysis that showed that every time there was a racist event, there are dangerous lynchings, uprisings, murders, things like that, that happened because of racial bias. There would be a marked decrease um, in in patents in African Americans in North America, and that led to huge work that she's done that talked about creating safe conditions for people to be able to invent. You need to know that you're not focusing on the most basic of needs in order to be in a safe and comfortable place. And that's what the next one is comfort. Um, Stability many times that's having food and sustenance and time and energy in order to be able to be comfortable and be at your best to be able to think through new things. So that's that side that's a little bit more floaty. But the things that I like to focus on when I'm mentoring people in particular is getting that developer experience correctly. I could do a whole talk on that, and I've actually have, and I can share some links to some things that I've talked about. I'm also doing a workshop at DjangoCon Europe about supercharging your development environment with VS Code and dev containers and things like that. But it's finding your favorite tools in Python, and getting really comfortable with those tools so you can focus on the new things that you're learning about and not focusing about starting up your development environment. This is why I recommend things like dev containers and VS Code, which is a free editor, things like that. Excuse me. I also think understanding pip and how your virtual environment works. You can also invest time in understanding poetry or Hatch, for example. These are ways to start new projects. But if you do find a tool, really get to a comfortable level on it so you can focus on these new things. And it's an iterative process. You're always going to be starting new tools and improving your developer experience. But I work with people on trying to get to a good baseline. I also encourage people to destigmatize failure. You're going to fail a lot. And it's as soon as, and what failure means is changes depending on what you're producing. But having a PR rejected or having PRs commented on where there's tons of comments and tons of changes, it's really, really common. My mentor, who is a C Python contributor, just talked about how one of his PEPs, his Python enhancement proposal, which is how Python improves, was rejected after years of trying to get it through. And now that he has to go back to the drawing board on trying to figure out why it was rejected and whether or not it was conceptually not where it was, where people wanted it to be, or if there's a little bit of education that needs to happen to the group that was needs to, which is the Python Steering Council, on whether or not the PEP was good or not. And it's really tough to navigate, and you're going to be navigating it your entire career. So really removing the idea of failure, because every moment that you are failing, you are receiving information on how to improve. And it's not always sometimes your fault that failure happens. Sometimes it's a system failure. And leaning into that as well and trying to ask the right questions to remove the failure obstacle. I also recommend finding in depth support. So that is making friends, finding people like me who may be able to help you. I don't always have the bandwidth to help everyone. I try and I really enjoy working, and I'm so glad I'm here. And really mean it when I say all of you all are my friends now. So please feel free to reach out, and I can tell you whether or not I have the time or not to help you with your request. But don't hesitate to reach out because I may have the time. But finding resources to be able to get that in-depth support, and then finding many people too, because you can't rely just on one person because they may have bandwidth issues. Reach out to a bunch, and then also find options to be able to share your findings. I recommend dev.to, dev community, if you don't have a blog. But I also maintain a blog, and I have for years, and that's been a really helpful place to share my ideas. And this is one of the last slides. It's a little bit busy, but truly there's not a lot on here. You start with phase one with researching and building relationships. I keep a ton of notes, and if you have time, I can also show my notes. I don't know. But I keep a ton of notes. I actually just opened up a private GitHub repo and created a wiki so I can keep all my notes and mark down there. Some people use Obsidian, things like that. I set up a calendar for my open source contribution, so I'm on a weekly basis. I'm reminding myself, and I have a chunk of time set for open source contribution. I don't always do it. It's really, really hard, and sometimes I get busy, but I'm also volunteering my time for innovation. So if I don't do it, it is also okay. And I want to be able to live a long, happy life where I'm not working myself to the bone. And I also try to create conditions for myself to focus. So, like I mentioned, this is developer experience. I try to keep a quiet house around the time where I'm trying to code. And then I also try to give myself long stretches of time where I don't have to get up and do something, because having those breaks is hard for me. And then my phase three is celebrate every step of the way. So if I just got it to compile and build on my machine, I like celebrate so much. And even though that feels small and it's the first step, it's really a good way to like motivate you to the next. And then again, I'll go back to the curiosity. Make sure you're doing that curiosity. Curiosity doesn't even come until phase three. And phase four is create. It's the last and the smallest and least described. And it's really hard to figure out how to create. And implied there's a phase five is a failure. Because you're gonna fail and you're gonna have to repeat. And so you create and then you fail and then you start back at phase one. And I'll tell you how it turns out because I'm in the middle of the journey right now. I've done well in invention and other places, and I'm on a new one. And the things that I know, that I think about to know whether or not I'm doing it right or if I'm in the right places and doing the right things are these key performance indicators. Is my interest peaked? Is this fun? does this uh, um, get my wheels turning? And it's very, very intuitive. It's like a gut thing. Also, popularity. I want to work on things that are semi popular. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. I'm not really investing a lot of time in working on AI, for example. The things that I'm working on may help AI, but it's not about artificial intelligence or machine learning. That's just not my experience. But I do want to work on things that enough people are working on where I have that group of people I can like get that feedback from and I can talk to and I can ask questions when things don't work go right. So just get a middle ground on popularity is important to me. But for you, you might want to work on the most popular thing out there right now, and that has its drawbacks and its benefits. But that's a personal choice, but also could be part of your key performance indicators. And then also one of my things is, am I solving a problem? It's really important for me to make sure that I'm being concrete in my exploration that there's going to be a problem to be solved at the end. It just makes me feel good. It's going back to that kind of ego thing of figuring out that like what I'm doing is important and I'm actually helping people. So each time I do kind of just a curiosity dive, I also try to relate it back to things that I also know on goals that it could be solving. And that's it. That's the whole presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know about this presentation. I don't know if I have time to answer them right now. I think I might have gone long. This is the first time I've given this presentation, so hopefully I didn't go too long. But if you have questions about this presentation, Python contribution, VS Code in Python, or the Python Software Foundation, or Django Not Space, Django Not Space has an open session right now. So please apply to be part of Django Not Space. I think you'd be great.
Okay, Don. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. And we do have, I think, one or two questions. So I'll read it out
Sure.
quickly and then we tackle it and move on to the next presenter. So the first one is from Kwajo. And so he said, I'm interested in Django open source 8 weeks program. How do I start?
Yes. Okay. So you can go to the website Django Not Space, and I'm going to open it up on this tab. This is a website. It's also designed by one of our friends. If you know Hope Adoli, Hope designed the site for us, at least this page, and we're going to keep working with him on doing other things.
Okay.
And you can click on sessions, and it'll show the open sessions. So session one is already completed, and it started January 15th, but this one starts June 17th. Applications close May 13th, and they just opened about a week ago. So you can hit here, apply, and it'll go through to this application. And just to let you all know that there is one technical component that we look for. We do expect you to have a number of years of Python experience and some Django experience as well. Um, it is an intermediate program, but what intermediate means is really difficult to figure out. Oh, I don't think you actually can see. Let's see if I can show.
Yeah,
Is it
maybe if you can
possible?
share the screen or as well share the
Yeah.
link in the comment section.
If I think you can see that now.
Yeah.
So I went to this Django Not Space is the link, and then I clicked sessions. This is what Hope designed, and then I click on sessions. Awesome, thank you so much. And then you can see this is session two. I was doing that all while nothing was on the screen. And then this is the application. And then right here, this is like a maybe halfway down the application. You'll see that there's a contributing guide, and you'll have to go through this contributing guide for Django project in order to successfully submit the application.
Okay. So I think we have a last one.
Okay.
As a beginner who is just getting started in programming, specifically Python, how can I understand and contribute to open source programs, considering that I know very little?
Interesting. That's so a common recommendation that's I've heard many other places, and I think it's a good one, is to start with documentation. For example, the Python documentation. It's okay. The Django documentation is very, very good, but there's always ways to improve it. But I also think that's um, a tough recommendation as well, because if you're new to programming, you are very commonly new to reading docs.
Docs.
And good docs are really, really hard to create, and even experts in programming are not very good at creating documentation. So that would also imply that you have a skill in writing, and that's not everyone's skill set. Um, so one of the things that I also recommend, their programs. So Google Summer of Code is really good for starting this programming experience. I would also recommend going to sprints. So these are sometimes they're virtual sprints, and I'm happy to help navigate you through those kinds of sprints as well. But sprints are usually at the end of a Python conference, and it may be one day or multiple days. And in person, people will all gather around tables about different projects and then just kind of hack on it, right? And they'll start on the contributing documents, and they'll look around, and then just like pick an issue or a ticket or kind of play around. But that means that you'll also have people who are working on the exact same thing as you at the same time, and are usually the experts at it, and are very, very commonly open to helping you navigate those things too. As I've been working on C Python, I know very, very little C. I am a Pythonista through and through. I also have JavaScript as my background, um, but I don't know much. But I'm jumping in too, and my mentor actually told me that's a little bit less important. You kind of learn as you go. I don't know if you can see, but like right back there, I have a C Python or excuse me, a C reference book, because I don't know C, but I'm trying to contribute in C. So I look at other code that's in the code base to try to copy things over. I use my reference book, and I wait until I kind of run into a problem so I can answer that question that's right in front of me, instead of trying to boil the ocean or learn everything at once. There is no level at which you need to know everything. You need to know what's in front of you, and you need to know how to learn the thing in front of you. I hope that was a good answer. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. That was great. All right. So that's and it for Don.
All right.
Thank you so much for that good presentation. So I
Thank
guess
you.
we'll quickly jump into the next speaker.